on. We're good to go, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I would like to call this meeting to order. And at this time, I would like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and acknowledge the diverse indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as Cree, Dene, Sotu, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. I will do a roll call of committee members first. Councillor Stevenson.
Good morning.
Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
Councillor Rice.
Good morning.
Councillor Rutherford is here.
Good morning.
And I'm here. I'll check if other council members are also joining us. Councillor Wright.
Good morning.
Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
Councillor Paquette. Councillor Tang. Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Salvador.
Good morning.
And now Councillor Cartmel is away on other council work. And Councillor Jans. All right, we'll acknowledge them as council members join. Adoption of the agenda. Who would like to move that? Councillor Rutherford, would you like to move that? Councillor Knack, you do that all the time, or what? Councillor Knack.
I like the minutes, so go ahead.
I'll move the adoption of the agenda as presented.
Thank you so much. And
Second. Oh, we don't need seconders at committee. I apologize.
At a committee, we don't need a seconder. Any questions on the adoption of the agenda? Call the vote, please. Oh, somehow just hold on. Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I got it. Here
We have all the votes.
Good. All right. Display the votes. That is carried. Approval of the minutes. Councillor Knack.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the adoption of the minutes from the February 16th, 2022 Executive Committee meeting.
Any questions on the adoption of the minutes? Seeing none, please call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Any protocol items? I don't see none. Items selected for debate. All right, council members, who wants to go first? Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to select item 6.2, please, and 9.1.
6.2, 9.1. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to select 6.3 on behalf of Councillor Jans and also 6.4.
6.3, 6.4. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Let's see if there are any others to be selected. Nope, that's it. And Consular Rice,
I would like to support selected 6.1 and then for debate and plus I think this one could be time specific for 1:30.
we'll come to that. So just a quick question, Consular Rice. On 6.1, you have questions to the administration, right?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
got it, okay. All right. So we have selected all the items that are for debate other than items being postponed. So, Madam Clerk, next is to vote on the reports not selected for debate.
I'll move
Yes, please.
the
Councillor
remaining
Knack.
items.
Councillor Knack has moved the remaining items. Please vote. Any questions? No questions. Call the vote.
We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the votes, please. Now can you read us back
Yes.
what we have already accomplished so
Happy
far?
to. Executive Committee has approved the following, that Connect Edmonton Next Steps will be coming to the council, will be coming up to council requesting that it be realigned to the May 16th Executive Committee meeting. Executive Committee has also approved the River Valley Alliance land acquisition, has a revised due date of June 15th. 5.3, Affordable Housing Land Assets Management and Opportunities is going to come back to this committee on November 16th. Potential amendments to the emergency management bylaw will be coming back, just to be determined. And the last item here is the Edmonton Research Park. It's a response to Councillor Tang's inquiry. Will be coming back on March 23rd. And just a flag at ARC, we were asked if we could make that time specific, which we can do so at the start of the March 23rd Executive Committee meeting.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Request to speak, none, and the request for specific time on the agenda. So, Madam Clerk, we would have to make 6.1 time specific in the afternoon. Can we make that for 1:30 for Councillor Cartmel to attend?
Absolutely.
So that would require a motion.
Yes, please.
So, Councillor Rice, would you like to move that we make 6.1 time specific at 1:30?
I moved that the following item be dealt with at a specific time on the agenda. 6.1, the verdict drive stage 2 expansion, environment impact assessments, and the site location study at 1:30 p.m. today.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Any questions for making this item time specific for 1:30? Councillor Knack?
Thank you. I heard in your comment that this is potentially being done for Councillor Cartmel. I'm just wondering, and maybe I'm foolishly optimistic, but there are no public speakers, and I'm wondering if there's a possibility of making this closer to the end. He is, I think, at the same thing I am hoping to be at, which is the Alberta Municipality Spring Leaders Caucus, and if we have an opportunity to finish this agenda in the morning, that would allow me to fulfill my other obligations, but I'm not sure if, I'm wondering if we could, in the interim, leave it to last item, because I think they're dealing with it, and then see where we're at that point, and then decide. And maybe work with Councillor Cartmel to try to arrange that, because I'd also like to be at that conference that's happening right now.
So what time would you like to be there, Councillor?
What I is put that as last item for now, and then once we get to it, we can see what time of day it is, and if by chance we haven't finished any of the other items, we can make it time specific at 1:30 and work there. But if we're done everything else by 11 a.m., maybe there's a way for us to.
Oh, you're so optimistic.
Well, we don't have public speakers. I'd like to retain my optimism once in a while.
Okay. So, but Councillor Cartmel may not be able to attend. But why don't we do it this way, Councillor Knack? we make a time specific at 1:30 now. And if we have the agenda going fast, right, moving fast, then we can look at bringing it forward. And we'll, in the
Sure.
meantime, we'll check with Councillor Cartmel's time.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, good, okay. All right, please vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay. Consular inquiries. I do have one, Madam Clerk, and I will read that. That administration provide an update on progress in implementing the Chinatown strategy's recommended capital investments, including status on the relocation of the Harbin Gate, process on streetscaping, and park improvements, as well as projects that remain to be funded. And they'll come back in 12 weeks, right?
It's 13 weeks, just for
13
clarity.
weeks? Oh, 13 weeks, all right. Okay. Any other consular inquiries?
None that have been submitted to our office.
Got it, thank you. Reports to be dealt with at a different meeting? None. Request to reschedule reports? None. And now we go into our first item, which is 6.2, selected by Councillor Rutherford, implementation of program of city-owned historic resources, administrative and financial requirements. All right, is there a presentation from administration on this?
There is, if you'd like, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Excellent. So today with me are a number of colleagues from our infrastructure department, from urban planning and economy, and from our real estate group. I'm now going to pass the floor to David Johnson, who is our principal heritage planner in urban planning and economy. David, over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next slide, please. So heritage planning is an essential function for a city committed to enhancing its identity and attractiveness. The city's heritage program is dedicated to identifying and preserving built heritage throughout Edmonton. The heritage planners in our team work with private property owners interested in restoring historic resources, but we also work closely on city-owned historic resources, such as the Queen Elizabeth II Planetarium and the Rossdale Power Plant that you see on this slide. Next slide, please. The city plan calls for us to promote Edmonton's history and encourage a sense of local identity by preserving and enhancing heritage. As an owner of 61 identified historic sites in Edmonton, the city has a direct role to play in achieving this objective. An implementation program for city-owned historic resources is part of implementing the city plan and will enable the administration to evolve our approach to these important assets. Next slide, please. The city has a role in the active stewardship of historic resources. We own 23 fully designated municipal historic resources, and another 38 structures are on the inventory of historic resources. These properties represent a range of building types and condition ratings and uses and are significant assets for our community. Next slide, please. As the city strives to show leadership in historic preservation with its own assets, there can be several challenges, including complex buildings that have unique needs and conservation approaches, additional budgeting considerations beyond typical buildings, decisions regarding the sale or lease of city-owned historic assets, the expectations of preservation advocates and the broader community, determining the priorities and terms of these properties, and uncertainty on how to repurpose these assets in an optimal way. While many city-owned historic buildings are in good condition and many are undergoing rehabilitation at this time, at present, there is not a coordinated decision-making approach to these assets, which has in the past resulted in the loss of some buildings and concerns about the conditions of others. Next slide, please. The implementation program will focus on three key principles: stewardship, financing, and asset management and portfolio management. Next slide, please. The implementation program will establish processes to assist in decision-making and prioritization. These include areas like historic asset selection, the classification of city-owned historic resources, determining the long-term asset use, disposal decisions, and acquisition strategies for both long-term portfolio enhancement and also to address potential emergency requests. Next slide, please. The administrative and financial requirements of the program include the creation of 2 full-time equivalent positions, the development of a program terms of reference, having regard for areas such as the responsibilities and roles of the team, governance considerations, GBA plus considerations, program funding and costs, and an initial funding request of $3 million to initiate the program, as well as future budgeting to support ongoing stewardship in the long term. Next slide, please. The short-term priorities of the program would include an overall portfolio review, evaluation, and classification of assets and identification of rehabilitation priorities. The medium to long-term priorities would consider condition assessments and potential future uses, processes for retention or disposal, and potential acquisition of historic resources. Next slide, please. This concludes the presentation. We're pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'll go to Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you very much. So when I read this report, I was surprised to see that there was 38 structures on the list that are still not designated. And I'm just, wanting to get a sense from administration as what's been the barrier or what's been stopping us from getting those resources designated.
Mr. Johnston, can you tackle that question, please?
Sure. First and foremost, obviously, a decision would have to be made by the city to take that step. Designation does entail full legal protection of the building. It could not be demolished. It could not be inappropriately altered. And that can pose some limitations on owners for how they want to reuse the building. And I think for those 38 structures that we haven't made that decision, I think that's sort of that lack of clarity or lack of wanting to take that step and retaining some flexibility in those properties.
Councillor Rutherford, what I would suggest is as part of the work for the heritage strategy, that's the type of stuff, that's the type of analysis we could do to help inform council about what the best next steps are for those structures.
Yeah, I get that, and I'm also concerned when I see that this motion was made in 2019 and it's coming back now in 2022. And I worry that, again, when we say things are priority, but it takes 3.5 years to get back to council, what are we losing heritage-wise in the meantime? And so I guess another question I have is, it says sort of varying stages of repair or, so can you just give me a little bit of insight into, from those 38 structures specifically that are not designated, what are we looking at in terms of those varying levels? And can you give me some examples of those from high quality to low quality?
I can offer a couple of examples. The Edmonton Ironworks building, for example, downtown, just east of the police headquarters, is a city-owned asset. It's on the inventory of historic resources, not fully designated. There's been building condition assessments undertaken on that building, and the building right now is under active rehabilitation to repurpose that structure. We will be designating the building as part of that process. That step just hasn't been initiated yet, but that is an example of a building that is in full rehabilitation right now. Another example would be the Rossdale Power Plant complex, which is also on the inventory. It's a designated provincial historic resource, so we are not able to demolish it, but we are in the process right now of doing a detailed building condition assessment, adaptive reuse considerations, and prioritizing what rehabilitation steps we would take on that building given the limited funding we have. So there's a couple of examples of sort of the spectrum where we can be at.
So I think it's fair to say, Councillor, that not being designated does not mean that there has been complete inaction on specific structures. and I see that Ms. McCabe is concurring.
Yeah,
That's correct.
I definitely don't, I don't doubt that. However, you know, when I often think of, as city, we need to be leaders in demonstrating that. And so what better way to be leaders than doing that with our own properties? So that's just what I contemplate here. But I understand, yes, absolutely, I'm sure, and I know the team that deals with life cycle is amazing and does great work with Adam's department, and I have no doubt on that. It's just, yeah, it's more about the message we're sending in terms of that. Thanks. I will probably come around for a second round. I do have a potential motion to put forward, but I see Ann has some questions as well, so, or Councillor Stevenson has some questions as well.
Okay. Thank you, Rutherford. Councillor Stevenson?
Great. Well, yeah, I was going to start by saying that I would like to put forward a motion to advance this as an unfunded service package. So we wanted to put that out there. I don't have anything drafted though, so Councillor Rutherford, I will leave it to you to table a formal motion. But did just have a couple questions. So that's actually the first question. I'm just interested, sort of a meta question, but just curious why this report didn't come with a recommendation, why it was information only.
Because I believe that it's within our delegated authority and we advance work as we need to council, and that we have a heritage strategy that we hope to get underway that'll be funded, and then we'd bring recommendations forward to council at that point.
Okay, so there isn't a specific reason why the recommendation wasn't to advance an unfunded service package?
No, not that I'm aware of, not at this time. There wasn't a specific reason for that.
Okay, yeah, you know, I always just worry that again, on a different agenda, there's always that risk that this may have just been received for information, which would have missed that opportunity, I think, to do what I think is really great work and really well laid out. I just had a few really quick questions, just really thinking about how this work can support increasing the energy efficiency of the buildings as well. So, you know, I'm really interested in looking at how we kind of achieve multiple objectives at once. So both the historic preservation, but also, you know, the climate change actions. There is reference as well to listening to nonprofit organizations, but just wondering too if there's potentially been looked at. I know other jurisdictions have really focused on using heritage assets for affordable housing, and I'm wondering if any of that has been explored or scoped out.
I can offer sort of a couple of examples on the greenhouse gas reduction, Councillor Stevenson, and we're in the midst right now of doing an investment study on Hangar 14, which is the home of the Alberta Aviation Museum. It's a fully designated building, and part of the considerations of that report are in the longer term, in terms of life cycle management, what steps can be taken to reduce the greenhouse gas issues with that building within the realm of historic preservation. And there's a balance there, of course, where we could do all sorts of things to a building to improve its energy efficiency, but a lot of those can be detrimental to the historic character of the building. So we have to balance those out, and those considerations are being made. Another example is the Ortona Armory, where we are, you know, again, looking at that type of circumstance, tenant comfort, you know, and efficiency of operations of the building, and again, balancing out retaining historic character and those features. In terms of affordable housing, I don't have any specific examples that we're working on right now, and there may be others that can contribute to that one.
Yeah, well, you know, I know the Hardware Grill building, I'm sure that's not its actual name, but I believe there's affordable housing in that as
That's correct, yes.
Existing precedent. Yeah, and again, I know there's some great examples in Vancouver, for example, where they restored these heritage assets for affordable housing as well. So I think that's just maybe some context for me is, you know, really excited by this program. What I would love to see is a focus on, you know, some of those assessment studies really digging into the energy efficiency of it and looking for those partnerships as well. And also just a question too, it's sort of, you know, there is that question of like, when is it appropriate to sell city-owned heritage assets? And I'm wondering the viability of sort of considering it a for-profit venture. So is there any sort of market in, you know, rehabilitating and then selling some of our heritage assets to potentially fund the heritage program moving forward? Including sort of providing higher density opportunities on that same piece of property if the building is maintained and then we sell off the land rights or something like that.
That has been a consideration as this program has been evolving about. We have sold some historic sites like the substation on 124th Street, the Stovall Block. Some buildings have been sold to private owners. The proceeds of those sales currently do not get redirected back towards the buildings, and it has been brought up as part of the conversation about, is there a change to city policy that could assist with that?
Great. Yeah, that's something I'd be certainly really supportive of in terms of providing that those proceeds could be cycled back into the program to make it more self-sufficient. Thank you. Great work. Really excited to see this coming forward.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Rice, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. The first one is we talk about the heritage strategy and it's not funded in the past years and right now for us to fund in this and to move forward. Can you tell me about what's strategic linkage for this heritage strategy and to support our local business and our city's economy growth? And then from that long-term vision, and it would be helpful.
Councillor Rice, for sure, investments in our heritage strategy support local businesses. A lot of the heritage buildings are on main streets within our city or on and tend to have local businesses in them. It also supports the city plan in a very strong way in terms of creating vibrancy on our streets, as well as maintaining our part of our essential city and our heritage. And I'm sure the team has way more to add to this because it has very strong strategic alignment. Mr. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I think, again, many of these buildings are often in business improvement areas, and, where there's vibrancy already, and a lot of those buildings draw people to those areas. Of course, if you think of Old Strathcona and 124th Street and 118th Ave, those historic buildings are part of the fabric that people enjoy, and making investment in those buildings, just keeps them as part of that. And then, of course, there's the bricks and mortar end of it, where rehabilitation of these buildings employs local tradespeople. There's many companies that rely on that type of work and are a part of our local economy. And even through the pandemic, we continue to designate buildings and see rehabilitation work being undertaken.
In terms of the investment you talk about, and so our city, for us to implement this program, is there only funding source from city, or we use some external private investment and for the heritage buildings? So how that models works, is there any specific plan how we attract investment from privates and from business development perspective?
Quite often, the maintenance of heritage buildings requires both city investment and substantial private investment. And the team can add some additional details to that for sure.
If the building is owned by the city and has a public-based operation within it, that obligation would certainly fall more on the city. But the program is looking at opportunities to where there could be a partnership between the city owning the building and leasing it to a for-profit entity of some description, and then the ongoing rehabilitation work to the structure. Several of our lease arrangements with historic buildings that we own, those obligations are on the leaseholders' shoulders to take care of that. So there is a sort of an existing partnership framework that can be made. But certainly there was consideration through the development of the program about could there be more opportunity in that end than just public use only of these buildings.
Do we have a specific plan and in this strategy? I tried to find it, and by reading the report, I couldn't find it.
I think those are the types of details that we would develop once the program was fully initiated.
So my concern is about based on resources requirement and to implement this program, we need 2 more FTEs and we need $3 million for one time. But my question is, and between 2011 to 2009, for 8 years, and for this program, we only requested $1.2 million. And then what's this $3 million for one time required for? And so this is what I try to make that connection between the resource requirement and what's needs. And then what's this money used for? And specifically, and then I heard the motion coming to put into the budget and funding package. I have follow-up question as well. Can you answer that question and specifically?
Yeah, the funding request number was largely based on the City of Calgary program. When they initiated their program on this about 10 years ago, they found that to be a reasonable number to initiate things and do a combination of operating and capital. Some of it was directed towards bricks and mortar rehabilitation work on individual buildings, and the balance of it was used to fund building condition assessments, feasibility studies, and things like that, market studies on the building separately.
Thank you. I will come back for the second round. My time is out.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I just want to follow up on Councillor Rice's line of questioning on the partnership opportunities.
Would you like me to take the chair?
Or we don't have on as committees. I don't have to see the chair. Yeah, on that, on the. When you look at 118th Avenue, for example, the Gibbard block is a very good example of partnership, and also really ties into that 15-minute communities that we want to pursue. Is there a way maybe you can do more focused analysis of opportunities in different parts of the city where we have these historical buildings, where there's a potential for partnership with private sector, nonprofit sector, and really help repurpose and revitalize these buildings? Also bring more activities into the neighborhood.
Mr. Mayor, we're definitely open to that as we work through the program. I see Mr. Johnson coming off mute. Did you have some stuff to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, taking some cues, I guess, from how the City of Calgary's been looking at it, they have been doing things like detailed feasibility and market studies on some of the buildings that they own to kind of say, we've determined that there's not necessarily an ideal public use in this building. We think it's an important structure. We're somewhat reluctant to sell it outright. We think it should stay in public ownership. But are there some partnership opportunities? And so they do these more detailed feasibility studies and market analyses to kind of get a sense of, well, what's missing in this part of this city, in this neighborhood, in this community, and where go out to industry and seek opportunities to connect.
Would that require some direction from the committee for Ms. McCabe for you to explore? Or would you identify or look for opportunities, then bring something back to council of potential, options?
We'll continue to look for opportunities and then bring those options forward to council as necessary, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, it'll be nice to have, these kind of opportunities in all parts of the city.
Agreed.
That's one. The second is that as we kind of reimagine our city and apply the equity lens, majority of these historical assets do have, they don't necessarily reflect that historical diversity of our city, right? Are we taking any proactive approach to identifying historical assets that might be missing from, say, indigenous communities' perspective or racialized communities' perspective, that we haven't really put enough emphasis on actually proactively looking for them?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. I think one of the priority actions that we would be looking at is the city owns hundreds of other buildings, and we know there are some properties that the city does own that have historic merit. And part of that evaluation would certainly be to broaden that scope of what we've considered in the past and seek out buildings that have connections to other parts of the community to ensure that we're covering that diversity basis.
And that work will continue, and that doesn't require, I just want to understand that, does that require additional motion or anything from committee, or you would do that work independent of that?
No, Mr. Mayor, we don't require a motion. We're committed to doing that work in the department.
Good, all right, that's good. And on the $3 million, I'll look forward to Councillor Rutherford. I think she has a motion that she's crafting, and look forward to that, because we need to absolutely close some of the gaps that exist in the funding. So that's on my end, and I'll go to Councillor Rutherford next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have one more question before putting the motion forward, and it's just regarding the budgeting from 2011 to 2019. It talked about the process for designating 8 sites. Were those 8 sites designated? So are they in the list of 38, or are they in the list of ones that are already designated? Like, so when that halted in 2019, was that process complete, I guess is my question.
The funding to those buildings was paused in 2019. We have continued to add city buildings to the inventory and designate city structures in the meantime, such as the Edmonton Cenotaph. So the work is still continuing.
Okay, great. Well, I will put my motion forward that the implementation program for city-owned historic resources be considered as part of the 2023-2026 budget process and brought forward for discussion during the 2023 to 2026 budget discussion.
I'll share it in the chat, and we're just getting it up on the screen.
So again, I'd like to highlight to my colleagues that I think I definitely heard during the campaign, and I know people want to see our history preserved, and as I mentioned already in this meeting, we need to be leaders in that as a city and with our own assets, and I do think that there's such economic benefit for a small investment, even in terms of tourism and attracting people to this city. So I really see this as a win-win, and as Councillor Stevenson highlighted, there's ways to hit multiple objectives. I don't think, as the city plan highlights, these are growing our city and preserving our history are not at odds with each other, and we can do both together in tandem. And so this motion today just creates that package to discuss in the prioritization of all of our other priorities as a council in that budget discussion, but I think it's important to be there in consideration of that as part of that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Rice?
I still have a question and to
Yeah, go ahead. You can ask questions to admin on anything or on the motion as well if you wish.
Okay, sure. So in terms of this motion, yes, the intention, and then I fully support it, and specifically on how we can support our city's economic recovery and specific after COVID-19. That's really appreciated. And however, my concern about this, by looking at priorities and for our budgeting purpose, and then is this the city's priorities? And then it's my understanding right now for all the motion we put on the floor and will result in 2023, the property tax probably 10 to 12% for our city. And I think for this type of concerns, we do need to listen and to our public's opinion on it. And then, yes, and the history reserve is so important, but this is actually our key priorities. And how we can move our city and with limited resources to move into the direction and align with our key priorities. And specifically, and to administration, can you tell me, and for the requesting $3 million, does that include the 2 FTEs cost, or is additional to FTE cost for this as well.
The full-time employee positions would be separate from that ask.
From that ask, and then why? And then we need this one time, and then like triple amount of money, and for past 2011 to 2019 for 8 years. And then how many years will last for this $3 million? And do we have plan to request more in 2023-26 budgeting?
I think just to give you an example, again, the city of Calgary initiated their program with a similar ask. Right now, they're
Sorry, Mr. Johnson. I just want to be mindful to my time. And then it's not about the Calgary what it's doing. It's about our city's needs.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah.
We do believe that this is a reasonable ask for the needs of the city, and we might need to advance more asks as we learn more about the infrastructure within the existing assets. So we have balanced that there's a number of priorities for the organization. We do think this is a reasonable ask for the importance of the file.
And how is the number come from? And for this,
the number comes from looking at what other cities have invested, as well as looking at our asset inventory and what we think is a reasonable first step in this space.
For how many years will last for this $3 million?
I believe isn't it ongoing funding?
Annually?
So it's ongoing funding for a number of years. And as I said, as we learn more about the program, we will evaluate the amount that we're asking for, and it may go up or it may go down as we continue to advance this work.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I don't see any more questions on this. I think it'll be helpful, Ms. McCabe, as we do this analysis, and going back to Councillor Rice's question about public perception, how much we are spending on each kind of the categories. It will be good for us to know how much we are spending actually preserving the history of our city, which is a very important part of city building and instilling pride in our city. So, in the context of the overall budget, I think it'll be a good idea to engage and educate Edmontonians on that. Just want these resources will give you the ability I was asking earlier on about looking at all quadrants of the city and explore some of those possibilities I was talking earlier on about partnership with nonprofit or private sector to really bring more life into these historical assets. This will allow you to do that, right?
Yes, it will, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, good. I'm really excited about that. I think people go to these, like when I go to Gibbard Block or other places, it really brings excitement. It really gives that pride in the city, and I think we need to look to do that in every part of the city. So I will absolutely be supporting this motion. Councillor Rice, you have more questions? Councillor Rice?
Yes, I have more questions. Also, I would like to speak to the motion as well.
Okay, so why don't you go ask questions first, then we can go to the speaking part.
Okay, so my question is, yes, and we have 38 on inventory. And what's the criteria for the designation process? And then why? And we have so many, and in the past 8 years, we have the funding, and why we still have so many left?
Again, Councillor Rice, it would need the city to take the step to formally designate, and I think the past decisions, there's been a bit of lack of clarity on whether we wanted to do that or not in certain instances. In other instances, we have long-term leases that may be giving us pause on taking the formal step to designate. But I think it's largely just been a bit of a lack of clarity on whether or not we want to fully commit to doing that or not. But we have been treating a number of them as if they are protected. We're going through rehabilitation on those buildings as if we are. And things like, for example, the Horlack Park pavilions, which are not currently on the inventory, the assessment work on future rehabilitation of those buildings is treating them as if they were already on the inventory. So we're trying to take that lens on things.
Why do we need extra FTEs? Do we have existing resources and for this program?
We don't have existing resources we have some existing resources in this space, but we don't have enough existing resources to meet the needs.
So I Mr. Mayor, I can use my the rest of my time to speak to
Yeah,
this.
absolutely you can. Yes, go ahead.
So I'm not going to support the motion on the floor right now, and from our city's priority perspective, and then I do have the concern for so many motion on the floor that will result our tax levy and tax rate to up to 10 to 12% for the next year. I don't think that is our majority of our Edmontonians wanted. And I just want to simply say that. And so for the motions, I'm not going to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Knack?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just very briefly in speaking to it, and I very much appreciate those points raised by Councillor Rice about the various motions. I'll support this just very quickly to note, because of course, I think it's worth stating that approving this motion is to approve a tax increase. This sets up the ability for council to decide whether I support this at budget is a completely different story. I might not support this at budget. I might support a split in the middle. I might not, we could support more, but to be very clear, this doesn't actually increase our taxes. That's not our ability here to do that. So I can support this to allow council to have all of those items be debatable as part of the 4-year budget exercise. And and just from a governance perspective, it's far better to do this now than it is trying to do it on the fly in November and December. And so I think really in this whole year, the remainder of this year should be about whatever we think we need to debate for budget. These are the times to do these motions. So I'll support anything that's going to be in consideration for the budget, but to be very clear, I may not support the main thing down the road. So I just thought I'd offer that for all of council, because otherwise, and we've done this in years past, we've waited until budget and at the last minute tried to add a bunch of profiles to debate, which is incredibly disorganized and means we make really poor decisions on the fly. This allows us to consider this against every other priority and important service that we need to provide. So I'll support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Stevenson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just very briefly, following from Councillor Knack's comments, I think absolutely this was the right step in terms of being able to bring this forward and have a conversation, as we're looking at all of our priorities in our 4-year budget cycle. I think it's really important for us to remember that, the Heritage Program has grown considerably in terms of its area of responsibility, in terms of the amount of work it's been doing, but the staff has not increased in that time. So I think this is a really great opportunity for us to provide the required resources for Heritage to be part of our city organization and also our city as a whole. So excited for this motion and look forward to the budget package coming back this fall.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Rice, you have spoken to this already. So once a person has spoken to an item, Madam Clerk, can they come back for more questions? Because we're at a stage where we're closing on this item, right? Or debating.
I believe you're at the stage where you're closing on the item.
Yeah, so Councillor Rice, once you close on the item, there's no opportunity for further questions on that, right? So
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
And so I'm not speaking to this motion, I'm speaking to the item, and because I believe we have more motion coming, and also, this item is received as information as well, and I would like to have more speak for that.
No,
so it's not for this motion.
Yeah, so Councillor Rice, once a motion is made, then that motion is the recommendation. So we would not be, Madam Clerk, we would not be receiving the report for information, right? Would we?
Yeah, just for clarity, when there's a broad discussion, you don't have to have a motion on the floor, but once there is a motion on the floor, it
Yeah.
is advantageous for the assembly to focus its questions on the motion on the floor.
Yeah.
And then once you start the speaking process,
Yeah.
the last person to speak is the person typically who put the motion on the floor.
Yeah.
If this motion passes, you do not need to receive the report for information.
Yes.
The item is completed.
Yeah, so item will be completed. Sorry, Councillor Rice.
Okay, thanks for that
Yeah,
clarification,
good.
Anna.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Rutherford to close?
Yeah, I think I said a lot of what I wanted to say in the opening of this item, but I do really want to speak to cautioning my council colleagues on throwing out data like 10 to 12% that can be really inflammatory in the public eye when it is a process that many don't understand. So again, as echoing the sentiments from Councillor Knack and Councillor Stevenson, this is just governance in terms of making sure it's a part of that discussion in that prioritization. I may also not support this in seeing the context of all of the things that are before us. And so I think when we have to be really careful with our words on council because we need to educate people on the process that is. And so having this motion passed today is not mean that this is a part of a budget, nor is any of the other motions that will pass leading to those budget discussions. So I just really want to reinforce that again, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Seeing no more questions, mover has closed the motion, so please call for vote. Might disappeared somehow, Madam Clerk. There you go.
Yep, I'm
here,
happy
got
to
it. I
take your
got it.
vote
I got
verbally
it.
if that's
Here you go.
helpful. Oh, we've got it.
Got it.
Yep, we have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay. So we don't have to receive this report for information any longer because there was a motion related to that?
That's correct,
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
got it. Thank you. So we're done with 6.2?
That's correct.
Okay, our next item is 6.3, tax notice format, education, tax information, was exempted by Councillor Stevenson. Is there a brief presentation on this from admin?
I don't have a presentation, but maybe I'll just make some quick opening remarks.
Sure.
So in terms of the tax notice, Edmonton is required to collect education property tax on behalf of the province, but has no control over the education tax levy. As administration, we understand that this can lead to confusion amongst taxpayers, and the amounts payable to which order of government can be confusing. Fully separating and mailing the municipal and provincial property tax notices would incur about $362,000 in direct costs to the city and could have some legal implications. It's also likely to increase the resources required for tax collection and responding to inquiries, and will increase compliance costs for taxpayers. One other option could be to enhance the existing tax notice to draw greater attention to the distinction between the municipal and provincial property taxes. But the other thing that I would just maybe to close out on is just a reminder of where we're at in the process right now. We're approximately 2 months from the mail out. So undertaking any of these things for this year's mail out is likely not something that we can do at this point. And with that, if you have any questions, we're happy to take them.
Thank you so much. I know Councillor Stevenson exempted this for Councillor Jans, but I do have questions as well on this, but I'll go to Councillor Stevenson first.
Yes, thanks very much. Just a quick question around So the option of having two separate sheets of paper in the envelope. So for example, I think I pay my property taxes monthly, and it's an automatic debit, and it comes just as one payment. If we have two pieces of paper, that would be coming out as two separate debits.
So, Councillor, what I would say is the payment process, or how we do our monthly payment side of things, and what we show on a notice would be two different things. We wouldn't necessarily do two different transactions for it. We would still do a collection of one amount for a monthly payment program. It's just a question, at least in this context of this report, of what we show on the notice. Okay, that's perfect. That really alleviates any slight hesitations I had in having separate pages. So it can be done as a single payment, even though it's on two separate pages. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. That's all the questions I had, actually, and I will turn it over to my colleagues to ask more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Knack.
Well, that actually might answer my question. I was just thinking of doing what I'd like to see is to have it on two separate pages in the same mail out. So hearing the answer to that question, I'd be happy to do that motion. But I should just ask very quickly, you mentioned that there might be some challenges going to the two separate bills. And can you just, I know there was some talk about that in the report, but I wasn't quite clear as to what the specific issues are.
Yeah, so there are some administrative issues, and I think we have some concerns around just transparency and clarity for taxpayers. So on the administrative side, what we would look to is just the costs. Obviously, there's additional cost of paper. It's one more piece of paper for all 400,000 plus notices that we mail. But then in addition to that, there are some notices that we double or triple stuff depending on if one owner owns multiple properties. And so when you start getting to a certain limit and you add more paper, you have to then create oversized envelopes. You're doing more mailing. So this is doubling everything. And so some of them that were able to fit in one envelope will no longer be able to fit in one envelope. We have to increase our size for that, a little bit more manual effort. So there's additional costs beyond just paper ordering for going to a notice side. And then from the taxpayer perspective, the concern being if you have two different pieces of paper with two different amounts owing, you get the one piece of paper and it says this is how much is owing on Municipal. You get a different piece of paper saying this is how much is owing on the education. Now I have to do my own math to figure out how much I have to add together. We anticipate that will result in more property owners paying only one of the two bills, not noticing there was a second bill in there. And then, further inquiries, concerns, things along those lines. So that's the flag we put from a customer perspective of splitting out the tax notices onto two pieces of paper.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the two separate pieces of paper. There's a bit of that. I guess the challenge we continue to run into, and I've noticed it now for years, and you probably experienced the same piece, is that no matter how much we put it on that line, we write it, it's education tax. Nobody sees that. They see the final line item, and so there's no clear delineation between what's actually going to the provincial government and what's going to the municipalities. So the other thing I heard is that probably wouldn't do it this year. So I guess any motion being made would just be for future years at this point. That would be your ideal scenario. Is that correct?
Yeah, if council wants to consider a motion to look at splitting the tax notice into two different pages, we would look to doing that into next year. And I assume that would be a motion that would ultimately have to go to council for review.
Okay, then I'll do that at the appropriate time. I see others with questions, so I'll do that afterwards.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Actually, it's great to see this movement, and then I believe and many Edmontonians will appreciate it, including myself. I just have a very quick question regarding the community insights. And I do understand that there is no public engagement involved at this moment. And so the feedback, the leads for this work is being done, and from the feedback for 311 or tax conversation. So how could we communicate this and with the community for this change? Is there any communication plan in place? And also, is there any additional costs and for this work to be done?
So, Councillor, just to confirm your question, are you asking whether or not we should survey property owners as to whether or not they want two different tax notices, or survey property owners in terms of their knowledge of the difference between municipal and education tax?
No, I'm not about to ask the survey. I'm asking, is there any communication plan and for this update going to the public?
It's a good question. We hadn't considered additional communication. I mean, the notice itself is a form of communication that we send out to property owners. So if we're sending a different way of communicating that way, it would certainly be a change. That's a valuable point to make. We might want to then include some additional messaging to go along with that, both in terms of what we say during the release of the tax notices and potentially before that. We had not considered those additional costs at this time.
Okay, so there is no additional test is predicted and for this work to be done.
What I'm saying is we haven't planned to do any additional work. If we were to do that additional work, depending on the nature, there could be. If it's just, we add additional lines to our mail out media brief, that doesn't have a cost. But if we are looking to do any kind of videos or Facebook ads that are paid to indicate that there is this change, please be aware of it, that would come with a cost.
Okay, so you're talking about the cost for the communication. I'm asking the cost for this work, for this change.
Yeah, so there is a cost outlined within the notice, within the report itself. So if council wishes to go to 2 pages instead of the 1 page, there is an additional amount. I'm just pulling up the table there. So in the report itself, there's a bit of a table that shows to do 2 different tax notices in a single envelope. Mm-hmm. We're adding probably about $62,000 in additional costs. That's acknowledging, we're basically adding another 400,000 pages that we have to order and print on. And then there may be some additional manual stuffing of envelopes based on when we exceed that amount. So that's our estimate right now for additional cost to go to 2 notices.
That is ongoing annually at just a one-time cost? That
would be ongoing. Every single year we have to order that much more paper, print that many more notices. So it would definitely be a $62,000 increase to the overall budget every year.
Okay, thank you. That's my question. I yield my time.
Thank you so much, Councillor Rice. Councillor Wright.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, I understand the cost implications for adding that extra page, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to format the existing tax notice on the 1 page. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So in the section where it says, where do my tax dollars go, could that be like a pie chart, something more visual to separate it, not just what goes to the education tax, but also where the rest of the municipal tax goes to, administration, EPS and all that. Could that be considered? Is there any extra cost in having that looked at?
So certainly, Councillor, I think that would be falling under what we call kind of the first option within that table, which is just enhancing the communication elements on the existing tax notice to review the content and design of that notice. So, that would not come with a cost. I mean, it's more administrative time, but we can absorb that. We review those tax notices every single year. So as opposed to splitting the tax notice onto 2 pages, which would absolutely come with a cost for the additional paper and printing, if we were just simply looking at how we can redesign the existing notice to really try to highlight that more, that could be something we could do. Although, Councillor Knack has drawn the attention that we've gone through this process a few times. We can certainly have more of those conversations, try to show, where property tax dollars go to support that conversation. I will just also caveat that space is limited on tax notices, and there's a lot of legal requirements for what we have to include within that notice. So we're a little bit limited if we're sticking with the current letter format. We used to go with legal size paper. And so legal size paper would provide more space. We haven't even discussed that as an option here, but that would then be a different cost. So what I'm saying is we can absolutely, if that's the direction, instead of doing a 2 piece of paper, just review the way it's currently done and propose some options to you guys on how it could be further highlighted. We could continue to work on that. But that would be different than doing it on 2 pages.
Yeah, I'd like to see sort of more visual. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Jans. Oh, here you are.
Good
morning.
nice
to see you in person.
I wanted to say I understand Councillor Knack may have his subsequent here.
Yeah,
and-
he's still looking at, yeah.
Yes, and I wanted to speak in favor of that. And just from my perspective as a school trustee, I spent 11 years at the board, and I used to get phone calls all the time from taxpayers saying, I'm paying more in education taxes. I see that number going up, yet my class size is going up. Yet we don't have a new school that's built. Yet we're not being resourced appropriately. And the average Edmontonian doesn't understand it. It was pushing a noodle uphill to try and get them to understand that the resourcing for your school does not come from the city of Edmonton. It comes from the provincial government. And all the city of Edmonton does is collect that amount. And now in this provincial budget, we've heard that Mr. Mayor, we're speaking to it right now.
There's no motion on the floor yet if you wanted to speak to it. So
I
there's-
see.
so
Okay, well,
thought
I
if
guess
you
I'm
focus
violating
on-
questions then.
You can wait till the motion
I
is
will
on the
wait,
floor.
sorry,
Okay.
I'm out of order.
Okay, no
Thanks.
problem. I thought you had questions. No worries.
Nope, all good.
No worries. All right, Consular Principe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, has this been discussed with Communications and Engagement Branch? Maybe they have a better way that we can communicate that it is a provincial tax? Because when I look at the sample tax bill, I think that I agree with Councillor Wright that there should be a way that we can make it more visual, maybe make it a little bit more clear. So I'm wondering if you've been in discussion with that branch.
So we certainly can do more of that, both in terms of what we put on the notice as well as what we potentially advertise, through various different social media outlets or other mediums that we advertise in. We do have a communications representative that works closely with us on this work. And so if the motion would be to simply enhance the communication on the existing notice, we would absolutely engage our communication partners and have that conversation.
Right. And yeah, I'm speaking of just actually on the tax bill itself, not only social media and such, but.
That's right, including the tax notice
Yeah.
itself. Yeah, we
Okay,
do.
great. Yeah, great. That was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Principe. I have some questions on this as well, right? When I look at when my tax notice, it's very difficult to actually make that distinction because it's kind of embedded in the whole document. Is there a way for this year, even though we can't send out a separate notice, it kind of maybe in a bold letters or highlighted the education portion of the property tax or provincial portion of the property taxes, that it kind of stands out? Because a lot of people don't understand. They feel that we are collecting all that tax and we are spending all that money.
So, Mayor Sohi, we can certainly take a crack at doing some reformatting this year. There's still a little bit of time for that. I wouldn't suggest we could do anything other than playing around with some of the formatting.
Yeah.
That's one thing we could potentially look at, is just adjusting how that message is shown. If you're thinking it just needs to be a little bit more highlighted,
Yeah,
that's something that could be.
for this year. And I really like the idea of the pie chart, not for the tax notice if it's not possible, but when we do public engagement on budget, which we'll be doing public engagement budget, we have that pie chart that shows, 18% going to this service, 14% going to this service, 2% going to this service. What we don't have in that chart is that 30% is going to the province, right? Maybe we need to include that the overall tax that we collect, 30% actually goes to the province. So then during budget process, Edmontonians are engaged in knowing and asking questions. Why is that 30% going to the province? It's an education tool. Is that something that we can look at as part of the engagement during budget process?
I think it's a good question.
Councillor, sorry, Anton, maybe I'll go and then I'll flip to you. So Mayor Sohi, I think we can look at it. I think one of the challenges that we have in terms of engaging on our budget is what we're engaging on the city of Edmonton's budget, not on the property tax component. So we just have to be, and we can investigate this, but we just have to be very clear that what we're engaging on is the city of Edmonton's budget. And in an attempt to make things clearer, we don't actually make them cloudier for citizens.
No, I understand. When with the pie chart where it says where your money goes, I don't have that in front of me now, but I think there's a pie chart in our budget document that says where is your money going, right?
Yeah, so Mayor Sohi, just as a kind of a reference, in previous years, we've done exactly that. We haven't put it into the notice itself. So this, I think what you're discussing is almost now the second option mentioned, which is an insert. So keep the line items of what's being paid for or the bill on one page, but then include within the tax notice an insert that kind of says, where do your tax dollars go? How much is going towards education tax? We have developed that little brochure in the past. It's actually very kind of clean, a nice little small brochure. So it'd be easy for us to replicate that and going forward in the future years. So that's now a third reaction. So we have the reformatting. We have an insert that highlights where your dollars go, including how much goes to education tax. And then there's a third, which is just split them out and have different tax notices. If we were to do both, splitting it out and having an insert that explains that, that's probably going to be additional money as well.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, and I think I know $62,000 is not a small amount of money, but I think the money that we spent on communications, overall engagement with Edmontonians, this is a very important communication that we are kind of not doing good enough job of educating Edmontonians, because they look at the overall tax bill, they think that's how much money they're giving to the city for city services. So I think anything we can do to increase that transparency will be helpful for us. Okay, good. All right, so I'll go back to the list. Councillor Rutherford, you haven't had questions on this yet, right? Go ahead.
So my questions are to Ms. Owen. As a communications professional, do you think what we have right now is sufficient?
This conversation has illustrated that there are shortcomings in how we currently depict the property tax breakdown, and that we could, by use of graphics, be much more vivid about how the total is apportioned. I think we've got work that we can do, and Mr. Szabo has agreed that there's probably things we can do in the short term.
So my next question to follow up on that, do you think that the things that we can do in the short term will have the same value add as something that would cost $62,000, like the two split sheets, for example, as a communications professional? Like, will the value in that solution equate to the cost?
We may be able to create some economies by coming up with a communication solution as opposed to a physical separation solution.
Okay, that helps for sure. And then my last question to you is, again, as a communications professional, have you found that there's any silver bullet for communicating? Will there still always be miscommunications, or is there a silver bullet for communicating?
If there were a silver bullet for communicating, I'd love to have it. Often what complicates the communications agenda is the individual bias of a recipient of the information. I don't think there's a panacea solution, but what we have to do is be comprehensive in how we communicate to our audiences, the tax notice being a critical piece, and the ancillary communications around the arrival of the tax notice being supportive to that.
Okay, and I said that was my last question, but I have one more follow-up based on that. How can we as council in this year support that messaging, and how can we do better at communicating that to our constituents?
One of the things that we're doing better at the moment is providing you with information that you can use as ambassadors for the City of Edmonton. We'll be sure as tax time approaches to arm you with those materials, because you've got direct communications channels that assist us in getting the word out.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, thanks very much. I really don't mean to complicate anything in my next questions, and I'm very prepared to be told that it's a terrible idea or not very feasible. I'm just wondering, so Mr. Sabo, I really appreciate that you feel that there will be some opportunities this year to look at some of those design elements. So I think that's a great starting point, and very pleased that that could be done as part of this year's mail out. I'm wondering if there's a possibility of doing a small scale pilot with the 2-page this year, just in terms of testing the potential risk of people, again, maybe being delinquent on one of the 2 bills or some of that information. Just recognizing that having some testing, having a pilot of that would help inform decisions in the future. But I appreciate that might not be possible or may create more problems than it solves.
No, certainly, Councillor, I appreciate the suggestion of doing some kind of a pilot that at least tests the concern, because there is a valid concern that sending 2 different pieces of paper with different tax amounts on it could result in that. So we'd want to test that assumption. I would definitely be hesitant to do that this year, because it's not just about splitting it off. It's actually ordering the paper in advance, making sure that we can get all the printing done in advance with our third-party vendors. We're getting pretty tight at this point, so I wouldn't necessarily say we could do that this year. Certainly, we could look at a pilot next year as part of that conversation. And the mail is throw in as well, in addition to the formatting that we can do this year. One other thing we could do is take that insert we talked about. While we can't put in the envelope, we can create that insert this year and have it digitally available. And that would allow council to see kind of what we've done in the past with this, and they could be on our website. We can make it available on social media. So to kind of augment the questions to Catherine as well. We have a pretty good little brochure that we can redevelop this year and put online for people to take a look at.
Yeah, that sounds really promising. And I do, I think even if it was a fairly small sample size, like I think even 1,000 properties, I think receiving the 2 pages, I think would give us ample evidence to help make that determination. So if there's a bit of wiggle room for this year, I could see that being really valuable. But I do appreciate it's the 11th hour.
Well, and even if we were to do it with, include it in there, if we're going to add a couple pages in a pilot, add a survey. How do you like this kind of version, right? Or something like that. The other thing I just mentioned as well is we do digital notices, right? So a lot of property owners are now signing up for digital notices. In that case, the sky's the limit. We can add in, that reference material into that as well, because there's no postage cost, no printing cost, things like that.
Right. Well, and maybe that's an opportunity there, because I hear your point that it's late for ordering. Oh, I'm running out of time. Maybe if digital notices had the separate digital pages, that could be a way to test it out. Anyway, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just before I put the motion on the floor, I just want to double check. So to those points, I don't think we need to do a motion to do any of that work, those different options that you just talked about with Councillor Stevenson. Is that fair? I think there's been a clear communication that there's a desire for that.
Yeah, I think if we're hearing from committee today that there's a desire to kind of work on just the communication side of things, we can look at the formatting without a motion, and we can certainly look at creating that brochure. The conversation about actually inserting it into notices would be the next step that we probably would want direction for.
Because I do want to get, and I am going to put forward a motion just so you're aware of the 2 bills in the same notice. So I'm going to do that right away. But I would, independent of that, still want us to be working on those enhanced communications, trying to do everything possible to do that. So just wanting to make sure I don't need to include that in a motion. You've suggested that you're going to continue working on that based on our conversation today, correct?
We can do that, yes.
Perfect. Then with that in mind, Mr. Mayor, I'll move my motion. And I think we might have the final wording. Sorry, I'm just pulling up here. Yes. That executive committee recommends to City Council that the municipal and education property tax bills be circulated in 2 separate documents starting with the 2023 tax year. And just to be very clear, 2 separate documents, but the same mail out. To be just so we know which option we're talking about. I want to make sure that's clear for everyone who's going to be voting on it. I don't see the value in doing an entirely separate mail out. I think there's way too much potential for confusion to that. So that's what I'll move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. So it's on the screen now. can we add that municipal and provincial education property tax? So there's very clear understanding that that portion goes to the province, the education part?
Absolutely, and is it okay if we also add in separate documents, brackets, but within the same mail-out, just for absolute clarity?
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely would love that. That's the intent of the motion, so.
Okay, cool. All right, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Rice, go ahead.
I have a question to administration.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I do appreciate the intention from my colleagues. So today there are two options provided here. And what I heard from discussion is about we need to make decision and for two options, which one we choose, or we just choose one and for the pilot and in terms of communication perspective. And so look at the page 4 on the report and then for the two options. So right now the motion on the floor is about option 2, right?
Yes, I think this motion covers separate tax notices, single envelope, so.
Yeah, single envelope. And so
it would just be two different notices within the same envelope.
Is that I look at the option 1, and is that possible? And then for us to do some, like, for example, option 1 for the tax notice plus insert.
So what I'd say is as I mentioned to Councillor Knack, we will look at doing some of the first part of the one, which is the formatting conversation. We can certainly do that, as well as creating a digital version of the insert that can be disseminated both, through our e-notices as well as on our website. But if you were to actually ask to include that insert in the mail-out, that would be an additional cost that is not currently acknowledged within the motion or within our current planning.
Okay, so this additional cost is not covered under like 21,000.
So as I understand it, Councillor Knack's motion is suggesting we go with two different tax notices in a single envelope. That cost was $62,000. If we wanted to, in addition to that, include an insert, you'd have to add on the additional $21,000 on top of that. And there might be more cost because now you're stuffing envelopes further, could result in more envelopes, more postage. So we haven't considered an amalgam of those two options, but we could look at that more as part of the conversation.
And to be
is additional resources could be required if the tax notice, if two notices becomes confusing and we start to see taxpayers pay one notice but not the other. That could result in requiring additional staffing that hasn't been contemplated here.
Okay, so right now we're trying to say and then separate tax notice but in one single envelope.
Not including an insert this time.
Okay.
Just to be clear, Councillor, the administration's position is that we should be thinking about the receiver of the tax notice, an interpretive insert, as opposed to two separate bills that a person has to add up, with the risk inherent that they may only pay one of the two and or increase their calls to 311 to understand what they have, is a risk we'd like to flag. We favor one bill with good communication interpretive elements, as we've discussed earlier, and an insert next year to interpret the bill.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Rutherford.
I just want to speak to this motion.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate Councillor Knack bringing this motion forward. However, I want to be clear that I will not support this motion. I don't think the value gained equates to the cost that this would, and I think there's some risks that have been highlighted by administration that are significant, and I think we have to start thinking about those unintended consequences and the staffing hours and, the enhanced calls to 311 or having to track people down because they've only paid one of the two bills. And so I do not think that this is a value add To that, I do agree with Ms. Owen's assessment of, including a sheet next year in the tax assessment to have that clarity. But when I look at the tax bill right now, I see we can use more fluid communication to enhance that this year, as well as take on that, I commit to taking on that role of communicating well to my constituents and to other Edmontonians that follow me. And so I cannot, in good conscience, support this motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Anyone else to speak to this before I go to Councillor Knack to close? Councillor Rice to speak.
Yes, I do appreciate the intention for this, but I really want to say thanks to administration to bring the potential risk and then for this motion moving forward. And I look at the two options, I think, and then we can just start from like small steps instead of and get into this confusing and with the additional cost. And with that, say I am not support this motion as well.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate the conversation this morning. And I think the value in this proposal is increased clarity for Edmontonians in terms of their taxes and how they're spent. And I think that has a lot of hard to quantify value, but really significant value. So I'm excited to support this. Also look forward to the incremental improvements that can be made this year. But I do feel that at the end of the day, some of the design can get us partway there, but this is a real opportunity to very clearly delineate the two directions that the property tax we collect goes towards. And again, I think that the value of that is in building trust with Edmontonians so that they understand how we are the stewards of the property tax that we collect for city services and gain a greater appreciation of how we make best use of those funds that we do collect. So I look forward to supporting this motion, and thanks to Councillor Knack for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Jans.
Yeah, thank you. As I was outlining earlier, I think this is a huge favor to school trustees who right now are seeing increases in the education property tax from the provincial budget, but are not seeing more resources. Edmonton Public just received 0 new school announcements through the capital project award. Edmonton Catholic has seen I believe they did see a school announced. But in general, with the block funding, schools in Edmonton have received less under this government for the last 4 years than any other school district in Alberta. So Edmontonians have been paying more in education property tax, but getting less in terms of education service. And the government has benefited from an obfuscation where taxpayers believe that their education property taxes are making up the majority of funds for their education, and they do believe there's a relationship between their education property taxes and the classroom conditions, and that's not the case. It's about provincial revenues. So while I see a small amount of complication or confusion, I see that risk no greater than if somebody went to the bank and only wanted to pay a portion of their property taxes. They would understand that they're in arrears. I think there's a way that this can be communicated as 2 invoices that people would take forward and pay accordingly, but it'll lead to a greater interrogation by Edmontonians of the relationship between funding and their local school and how education has not been supported over the last few years by this government. So I think it's really important advocacy that we can do. I think it offers clarity on the part of the city too, in terms of how what we are truly responsible for as a city, that we do not decide where new schools are built, that the mayor cannot build you a new high school or change your yellow bus route. I think this is a clear division that would be enormously beneficial, not just to those at the city council table, but to school boards across Alberta too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. Before I go to Councillor Knack, I just want to quickly speak to this as well. I think this is absolutely worth exploring because one of the biggest cost item on property taxes that Edmontonians pay is the money that goes to the provincial government, and that money goes into the general revenue. That money necessarily doesn't go to education. But this is a revenue that we collect on behalf of the province, and a lot of Edmontonians actually don't know that. And so whatever we can do to educate them that 26% of on average, 26% of the property taxes in total that they pay goes to the province is higher than what we use to fund police, is higher than what we use to fund transit, is higher than what we use to do community services. So this is one single highest item on the tax bill that Edmontonians don't know about. I think anything we can do to educate them is important. So that's why I'm going to support this for us to explore this, and hopefully maybe this could be. I know this is not going to be a magic bullet, right? But it could be one of the tools that we have to continue to engage. And I look forward to some of the digital communications that Anton talked about sharing with us, that we can use our own media communications tools to engage Edmontonians on that. Yeah. And I'll go to Consular Knack to close.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and appreciate the discussion today, and just a bit of history on this. This is something that I've been asking for a number of years, and finally put it in the form of a motion last April to explore this. And part of what drove this desire over the last few years is some of what we heard Councillor Jans talking about, and just wanting to provide the greatest transparency. I think, I'd love to get to a world where instead of this even being collected, maybe the province just provides this as the direct funding to municipalities instead of 10 different grants that we have to apply for and divvy up in different ways. I think from a red perspective, it might be nice to just turn that all over to the city and then truly let the city use that to local priorities, and maybe not have different other funding sources. But that's a much bigger conversation for a very different day. But in my mind, it is really important to clearly delineate what is being used by the municipality for municipal services and what is being used by the province for their services. And I do appreciate the risk that was highlighted today by administration. I don't want to gloss over that. I think it is a very minor risk. And I would hope, I don't think we need to put this in the motion, that assuming we start this next tax year, that we apply some discretion, and note that there might be a few people who don't realize that, and that we are able to make sure we properly work with them and don't penalize someone on something new. I think it's going to be very minimal overall, because I think we all are used to getting different bills in the mail, and sometimes they have multiple pages, and we do our part to do our due diligence. But I think having this separated will actually provide us with a very clear, transparent explanation of where tax dollars go. Because, and with the greatest of respect to administration, who's done, I think, incredible work to try to continue to display that in a way that could be better understood. We've made changes over the years, and we're still not at that point where people clearly understand that difference. And I think that's not great. And again, it goes back to a key element of transparency. So that's why I wanted to bring this forward. I've been waiting to do this for a few years, and I think now is the right time to start planning for this in the next tax year, understanding the conversation we've had today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Call the vote, please.
We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay, we are going into our next item, which is 6.4, implications of adjustments to residential tax rates and subclasses, further analysis. This was postponed from February 16, 2022 Executive Committee meeting where we heard from members of the public on this. And we will continue our discussion on this. Councillor Stevenson exempted this item, and I think we did have a presentation at the last Executive Committee from administration, so presentation may not be necessary here, right? Am I right, Ms. Catron?
We gave the presentation the last time we were at the last executive committee, so we could either re-deliver the presentation or just move right to questions.
I think we can move right into questions. We had a very comprehensive presentation at that time. I think let's get into questions and debate. And Councillor Stevenson, you exempted this, and I'll go over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciated the conversation we had last month and feel that I got some clarity in terms of the approach I'd like to see taken on this. So I'd like to just kick things off by putting a motion on the floor for us to consider as a committee.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Great. So I'd like to move that administration develop a plan to phase out the other residential subclass and continue to explore the use of property tax subclassing to support the city plan, including possible definitions, in consultation with industry and community stakeholders, and return to executive committee with further information on the effectiveness and considerations associated with property tax subclassing. And that would be due in Q4 of 2022.
Okay, just to, if you could wait, Councillor Stevenson, for the motion to be put on the board. Here we go. The administration develop a plan to phase out the other residential subclass and continue to explore the use of property tax subclass to support the city plan, including possible definitions in consultation with industry and community stakeholders, and return to executive. Got it. Okay, thank you. You want to introduce this, Councillor Stevenson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so the first part of this motion in terms of phasing out the other residential subclass. So I feel very strongly that our current subclassing for the other residential ends up creating an inequity for individuals who don't own their own properties, primarily renters in our community. The buildings that they live in get taxed at a higher rate than equivalent condo buildings, for example. I think that's problematic. Although I appreciate that the logic is that apartment buildings are commercial enterprises, they come with higher operating costs that, for example, a condo building wouldn't experience. So I think that's really crucial in terms of providing that affordability and also that equity. The intent in terms of phasing that out, though, is that I recognize that that removing the other residential subclass means, if we're harmonizing, basically it's this idea of moving residential and other residential and harmonizing those two subclasses over time, just to avoid any significant jumps in the tax rate that people are paying. I recognize that may need to be phased in over a period of time to avoid some of those big shocks to individual property owners. I do think it's a direction we need to pursue for equity in our community. I'm also really excited to continue exploring opportunities for other subclasses that help align and support our city plan vision. So there's some discussion around density in the report. I'm interested in some other approaches as well, which, if I may, can I move to questions of administration now after I've put this motion on the floor?
Councillor Stevenson, yep. You want to put questions to admin? Yep.
Great. So I just want to dig in a little bit more to, oh, and I apologize. I think I've left my notes in the earlier meeting. My understanding of the MGA is that the wording is very broad in terms of we can create any subclass that we deem appropriate, provided that it's not zero and there's not more than a 20% differential between the highest and lowest classes. For me, I'm interested in, and just looking for some clarification around the requirements for site-specific characteristics and whether those can be geographical. So, for example, certain areas of the city, let's say, mature and established neighborhoods versus new neighborhoods. I know the report suggests density levels. Just wondering what our latitude is there, particularly around geographical marks.
So I think I can handle that one, Councillor Stevenson, Cam Ashmore from the Law Branch. So the way subclassing works is it's got to be tied to some form of property characteristic. Something like a geographical area would be a property characteristic because different locations within the city come with different values. But you couldn't do something like the nature of the property in terms of tenancy, for example. That's not relating to the property. That's how the property is being used per se. That's typically built into the value of the property, but it's not a subclassing characteristic. So you're thinking more along the lines of physical characteristics about the property, and geographical area would be one.
That's intriguing. I'll come around for another round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one very quick question. I want to make sure that the conversation related to tax subclasses for derelict and vacant properties will be part of Councillor Salvador's motion, so we don't need to talk about it here.
So I'm not sure if that's a question to administration or if that's a question.
Yes, sorry. That's I just want to make sure that item is still going to be discussed as part of the reporting to Mr. Salvador's motion.
So I do know that there's an existing report coming forward on problem properties. If there's a separate motion from Councillor Salvador.
I believe that motion also talked about in it the reference to tax subclasses. So I just want to, assuming that is going to be part of that report, I'm happy to just leave it. I just want to make sure it's going to be there so I don't miss out on the chance.
Within the report that's coming forward on problem properties, there is a section discussing tax subclassing as a potential option, yes.
Fantastic. Then I will wait till then. Mr. Mayor, I'll speak to it when the time is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Before I go to Councillor Salvador, I just have, sorry, Madam Clerk, sorry. Okay, sorry. Some questions to admin. I know the report you presented talks about a shift that will happen from other residential to single family or residential, and there was a significant shift. I think. Can you remind us the shift, the percentage-wise? How much are we talking about?
Absolutely. So just splitting out the two conversations, you have the one related to just the elimination of other residential, which is part of this motion, and the separate conversation, which would be to follow, related to creating potential subclasses for density.
Yeah.
If we're just looking at the elimination of other residential, it would result in about a 1.6% increase to the overall residential tax bill is what they were looking at.
Yeah, I think we need to understand that aspect because under that class, there are also a lot of low-income people who own single-family properties and also seniors on fixed income that own single residential properties. So how do we make sure that they are not burdened with the additional tax pressures at a time when they're struggling as well? So just want to understand that aspect if we do this analysis.
I mean, this is the inherent challenge with tax policy. No matter what you do with tax policy, for whatever reason, it's always going to have a redistributive effect. And so you have to make those determinations. You can't always just think about the benefit to one. You have to think about the consequences for the rest of the base and weigh those determinations, right? So, we could certainly then subsequently have conversations about other options to support, other kinds of things, but we'd want to review those one at a time and then consider those impacts as part of that conversation.
Yeah, because that's what I'm not concerned about the second part. I'm concerned about the first part, right? Because this is a very clear direction to develop a plan, right? I rather see more information being presented to council, maybe options being explored instead of a plan being presented, because this will require a lot of in-depth analysis and discussion, very comprehensive conversation that we would have to have before we make that decision. I would rather see more of a additional information coming forward, right, or some options coming forward instead of a plan coming forward, because that will. I know if that's your intent, Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, certainly. So just to respond, so the focus on the plan to the phase out is absolutely to address what you've raised. So a 1.6 jump in a single year, I recognize could be significant for some homeowners. So the idea would be to look at how the other residential and residential could be harmonized gradually over time. But I would certainly be more than happy if we change the wording to that administration develop options to face the other residential. Very comfortable with that. That's very friendly in my mind.
Yeah, okay, good. Because that will also allow us to explore conversation with the province. Maybe they should stop taking a portion of the education portion that we can use to close this differential between others and the residential, right? So I think that I want to have that option open because we want to have a conversation with the province on why they need to take that. So I think I want to have that option. So I think it will be nice to have that change from plan to an option. So, yeah.
I could just maybe jump in and say, the wording is within council's discretion, committee's discretion. We would bring a report forward either way to kind of outline what the conversation would look like. I will just provide, though, the clarity that currently the education tax rate is the same for all residential property, whether residential or other residential.
Yeah.
So we only have the distinction on the municipal side.
Yeah, no, what I was getting at is that the conversation has to be also about province vacating their share of the property tax that we can use to deal with some of these inequities that exist within our system, right? So that's what I'm getting at, if part of the option exploring that. And I want you to explore that as part of this motion. Okay. I see you nodding. Good.
Understood, Aaron. We'll endeavor to include a conversation about equalized assessment in the education requisition process.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And I'll go to Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. A few questions. The first question, and just from strategic perspective, why do we do this change?
That's to the mover or to administration?
No, administration.
Administration.
So yeah, I should say my question is to administration, is not to mover.
So I think Councillor Stevenson outlined both sides of that argument. I'm happy to kind of just review them as well. There are arguments both ways, and it really falls to council to make a judgment call using their discretion in terms of what are the most important factors to consider. Typically, residential, there's a distinction between residential and non-residential in our base way of doing things. In a pure property assessment system, every property owner pays at the same tax rate, no matter what, and only the determination of what is a fair distribution is property value. If you own $400,000 of value, you'll pay exactly half as much as someone who owns $800,000 of value. You'll pay exactly twice as much as someone who owns $200,000 of value. So that's the base, what we call equity, that kind of fairness within the system, within the assessment process. When you start getting into tax policy, you start saying as council, beyond the way the assessment process works by default, we believe there are other things we want to take into consideration that we believe are questions of equity. So when we talk about residential and non-residential, there's about that 2.8 to 1 ratio. And on that sense, we talk about on the residential side, we acknowledge they're typically the consumers of a lot of services. And so they drive some of those costs. On non-residential, though, from an equity perspective, vertical equity, we believe there's an ability to pay more because they earn an income. They have tax deduction capabilities, so they can deduct property tax as an income tax expense, and they're able to transfer those costs to their consumers. So those are typically the reasons, the weighing between those two sides of things. What's being included now as part of this conversation, other residential is that same conversation about, it's kind of a business, but it's also residential. What's being weighed in addition to this conversation now is a conversation around a separate kind of equity related to renters being in those properties. And so renters, don't own property. And so if we can provide, lower property taxes to the owners of those buildings, the hoping over the long term, this might result in some shifting, although we've caveated that we haven't noticed that in the past. It might be a small factor. But then the second part of that being, there might be just objectives beyond distribution related to, desire for density. And that we might want to signal through our tax policy that there's a difference in density, that we want to encourage density or show that density is taxed lower, or in this case also that low density is taxed higher, right? So you'll always have that trade-off. So those are, in a nutshell, I think some of the conversations that are swirling around subclassing.
I may need to come back more, and because I'm mindful for my time to take. We talk about encourage great residential density, and I think that is a goal and one of the goal and from city plan. The question is, and right now for this encourage greater residential density is already, and we heard lots of public concerns and pushback. And then how we can, do we have any strategy and how we can look at this? And right now, on the top of this, we add this tax view density based residential subclass. And then how we can link them together and to look at it, yes. And I understand what you're talking about, two sides. We try to balance two sides. Is there any public engagement done to get the public viewpoints on this? And then right now we change the tax, and then at the same time, and because the one purpose is encourage greater density, residential density. I know I am a little bit confused, and even for me to ask this question, and so just appreciate if you try to answer, I may need to come back again.
Well, Councillor, certainly we appreciate that, these kinds of moves are significant. Whenever you change the tax rate structure and how we tax property owners, that's going to probably have opinions on all sides of that thing. And certainly we're happy to do more engagement. That's, a good part of that conversation. And really, I'd say for any tax policy conversations, rather than immediately jumping at changing a tax policy, we'd probably want to do some of that consultation. With respect though as well, I'd imagine if you poll single detached residential property owners, would you like to see a tax increase to encourage density? They'd probably say rather not. And if you poll high density property owners, would you like to see a tax decrease for your properties? They'd say probably yes. So, you have to, we kind of know generally what
yeah, my time is out. Yeah. I will come back.
Thank you, Councillor Rice.
Thank you.
Councillor Salvador.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks so much for the presentation. I'm actually quite excited about this, but I'll try to keep my questions tight here. I'm just wondering, kind of looping back to Councillor Stevenson's question around our ability to have spatial or geographic factors influencing rates. I guess how far could we go with something like that? I'm thinking about like special tax zones or even urban development zones. I know other municipalities, jurisdictions have done that. Is that what would be considered as part of this body of work?
So, this is specifically, as I understand it, within the motion related to conversations to support the city plan, which we typically would refer to as, question around densification. I just caveat, whenever we talk about geographic limiters, I always point out there's going to be a line, and there's going to be one house on one side of the line, another house on the other side of the line. We don't typically find the geographic way of doing things to be the best. We prefer to have other metrics. So some kind of a density metric of some sort we'd be looking to provide instead. But to your question, can we do this in other ways? Within residential, there's a lot of flexibility. We can sort of look that way. But we also then would want to consider any other conversations separately, because if we're talking about, for example, residential subclassing to acknowledge services in those areas, that's a really different conversation, and it actually goes somewhat against the way property tax is supposed to function, right? It's supposed to be a wealth tax where we find fairness in distribution is assessment valuation, and if we say we're kind of getting rid of that at the question of services consumed or services received, there's other considerations there in terms of the distribution impacts, and property owners that might actually need services more end up having to pay more. So you want to be very careful going down those roads, but certainly a conversation we can have. But I read this one specifically related to city plan objectives, which I read as density. I'll throw to Stephanie.
Councillor Salvador, just really quickly, the larger body of work is done through the growth management framework. So this would be one component of the growth management framework, looking at tax subclassing and how tax subclassing could support the city plan.
Okay, great. Yeah, because when I think spatial and geographic, I'm thinking particularly of like our goals around nodes and corridors, for example. So yeah, I definitely see that crossover with growth management. And just to your point around, I guess other metrics for determining that density, would it be a threshold? I mean, how would we be looking at different areas based on their density? Is that something that's assessed like year over year? How would that work logistically, I guess?
What I would say on that question is this is an excellent part of the work that is to come. And we would come back with a conversation around our best analysis of how to go about that.
Okay, great. And then this might be a slightly larger question, but I'm just trying to understand the scope of what's included in this motion. Yeah, I'm wondering about land value tax. As opposed to sort of that mixed or split that we currently have, and whether that's been contemplated as a. I recognize that's a huge conversation, but just a more equitable distribution when it comes to discouraging speculation, incentivizing some of that development so that people are building to sort of the highest and best use and potential on their properties when it comes to density.
Perhaps I'd start possibly that our law branch might want to comment on this one as well, but I would just point out that we are limited in our legislative abilities, and so land tax is not currently within our authority to contemplate.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that provides some great clarity.
I'll just add to that, Councillor Salvador. It also depends on what you mean by land value tax. So that term has been tossed about a little bit, but when you actually break it down to what do you actually mean by that, that becomes a more complicated legal analysis.
Right. Yeah. When I conceptualize of it, I'm thinking about sort of separating out the land versus the buildings or structures that are on that land. I mean, I think about, for example, some of the vacant parking lots or land that we have in our downtown. There can be a disincentive to redevelop and add to that property. So I'm just trying to think of, alternative regimes, but it sounds like that's not really within our legislative authority.
And when you're talking vacant land downtown, you're talking about non-residential properties, which is not the type of property that you can apply these type of subclasses to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador. Councillor Stevenson.
Great. Well, I think I've actually answered my own question in terms of how we define the residential. So I heard Mr. Ashmore, you mentioned it couldn't be based on tenure. So I was wondering why all the rental properties, but it's just about the 4 or more self-contained units that inform that. So just in terms of, again, property tax characteristics, so great that we could look at geographic. Does property also include the building and the building structure? So for example, net zero buildings being a property characteristic?
Just speaking briefly to that, we can analyze every single year what might be considered. I don't believe we currently have an attribute that's related specifically to green energy properties. You would look at location, which often you might have a conversation around. Some areas are typically considered, or age of property. Age of property is often a question around when it was built is how energy efficient it is. So that's a factor that we do take into consideration. But I think we're still analyzing things like, solar energy panels and things like that. We're not quite clear on their influence, but we just observe it every year.
And I'll just add to that, Councillor Salvador, Councillor Stevenson. If you're coming up with a legal definition to create a subclass, it's got to be very, very clear. You have to actually be able to analyze the property and say yes or no. So when you're talking about something like net zero, we come back to, well, what does that actually mean? And can it be analyzed? But to put it in a different context, solar panels, yes or no, that's theoretically possible. it might be legal, might not work, might not do anything, but it might be legal.
Okay, really fascinating. Well, I appreciate what a big piece of work this is, but it's such an exciting one. As Councillor Salvador said, look, I'm getting very excited just talking about it. So I'll leave my questions there, and I'll speak to the motion when we're ready to close. But really appreciate the conversation today, and really excited for what I hope is the work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I'll go to Councillor Wright, and Councillor Stevenson, can you resume the chair? I just need to take a break for a few minutes. Councillor Wright is next.
I just want to, Madam Clerk, am I able to hold the chair while I have a motion on the floor?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you in here.
Can she resume the chair that she has a motion on the floor? This is committee, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no worries.
Okay,
Great. I have the chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
thanks.
Councillor Knapp?
Councillor Wright is next because she hasn't had a round. Yeah.
And I'm just to speak to it anyway. Thank you. Councillor
Wright.
Hi, thank you. I had to step away for a second, so I hope I didn't miss someone asking this question. But Councillor Salvador had talked about the sort of, I guess, the bare land parking lot properties. Is there a separate class for bare land, whether it be commercial or residential use?
So I would distinguish here, and I think Cam would also like to jump in, between residential and non-residential. Within residential, we have a lot of flexibility on how we split those rates, but again, we'd have to have very clear physical characteristics that could define that. Within non-residential, there is technically a vacant non-residential tax rate, but we have regarded that vacant non-residential tax rate as ineffective because the way it is defined in the MGA, and we don't have flexibility to define it any differently, is it's a parcel that is not improved. And then it all comes down to a question of what is considered an improvement. Could asphalt be an improvement? Could gravel be an improvement? Could a fence on the property be an improvement? And so when you start considering these things and acknowledging that it's not our call, it falls to the Assessment Review Board, and this is the point we often make about the rigidity of tax policy compared to other tools, we would not be in control of that, and we seriously doubt we'd be successful holding the line on a vacant non-residential tax for properties that were like parking lots because they would claim that they were improved.
Okay, and with the residential then, would it be based on sort of the zoning of it, whether it be for a multi-use or what is it? RF1, I guess, is the single family.
So within,
I think, Council, you'd try to stay away from the zoning aspect of it. You'd look at the physical characteristics of the property, which tie back to the zoning in some way. But you can have a legal non-conforming use on a different zone. What you're really trying to capture is what is there, not what is it zoned at.
Okay, but if it's bare land, there's nothing there.
That's correct, Councillor, and that's the challenge of writing these type of definitions, because it's bare land. So what is the difference in the physical characteristic at that point? It could be geographical, theoretically, but getting into the zoning aspect, well, the bare land could be used for anything under that particular type of zone.
Okay. Okay, I'm just trying to get a greater understanding of this. Thank you very much. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Councillor Rice, did you have questions or did you want to speak to the motion?
I have questions to administration, so I didn't finish
Okay.
the first time.
Over to you.
Okay, it's my understanding this is a policy discussion, right? Policy change discussion. And then by reading the reports, and then we are talking about the timeline implementation for the change. So can you clarify and for the change implementation timeline? And because I saw the two different options here in the reports. And one is talk about the 2022 tax year, and one talk about a city council may wish to consider a longer transition period. So can you clarify this a little bit more and from timeline perspective?
Absolutely. So what the report outlines is that if we were to immediately eliminate the other residential subclass and get rid of that 15% differential, it would result in a 1.6% tax increase for the remaining residential assessment base. The conversation within this motion suggests that we should consider phasing that in. And so within the next report we bring forward to council in the fourth quarter of this year, we will propose a few options on how we could phase that in over a period of time. So say, for example, we did it over a 3-year period, reducing it at 5% each year. So from 15 to 10 to 5 to being that level amount, you would have only incremental increases on residential during those years of say about 0.5%. So each of those 3 years, you have a 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, acknowledging the math isn't perfect because it'll take into consideration assessment changes over that period of time as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And so is there any estimated financial benefit for the city by this change? With this changing?
So, I mean, arguments have been made certainly by some of the development community that by having a lower other residential tax rate or having a lower rate for their kinds of properties, that would incentivize more construction. We would have a trouble measuring those results. And so we wouldn't want to hang our hat, I'd say, on that argument. I think we're looking more to equity of distribution and city building objectives.
So can you describe a little bit what's the principle should be used to set the subclasses tax rate differential if other tax subclasses were added?
Sorry, Councillor, can you just repeat that question?
So if other tax subclasses were added, and what principles should be used to set the subclass tax rate differential?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that would also be a conversation we include within the next report about how we would justify those differences as well, and what would be the arguments both ways. There's always going to be arguments on both sides of that conversation. So on the density side, what we've looked to in the past is a question around, in terms of costs, that higher density may be cheaper for the city to maintain from a cost perspective. And so perhaps that's we want to build that into the way we do our work. I'll just flag though, within the work done for the city plan in the Hempstead report, which I think is a public document, they have noted that there are also additional costs for density, right? So typically capital costs are lower, less linear infrastructure to build and maintain when you have higher density, but operating costs are typically higher because you have higher service expectations for transit, for parks and recreation, things along those lines. So there's a bit of a trade-off, but the Hempstead report does suggest overall density is a more affordable way to go for the city of Edmonton.
Thank you. My time is out, and I will come back to speak about this.
Good, thank you. And I'll take the chair back, Councillor Stevenson. And Councillor Knack, you're to speak, and I have no one else. So Councillor Rice, you can go ahead. You can go again.
I thought that Councillor Knack and
he wants to speak to the motion. He doesn't have any questions to administration.
Oh, I just finished my questions, and you want me to continue to ask a question, and I still have a few questions. I said I don't have time anymore.
No, I will restart your time again. You go ahead.
Oh, okay. In terms of the tax rate differential, and so the answer provided, and then for the estimates and financial benefits, and then I do not say how the way, and then provided the way we can balance between the costs, between the capital and operation. And then I understand that we want to provide the more equitability and then in the neighborhood, but what's the balance way? How we balance that between the cost, operation, and the capital?
Councillor Rice.
So maybe
go ahead, Stacey.
I'll start, and then Ms. McCabe can add. I think that would be part of the work that we would do in terms of the report that we bring back, looking at what would we do in terms of subclassing and what are the principles that we would apply in terms of distributing taxes across any subclasses. And we'd look holistically at what is the component of the budget that's capital versus operating when we look at devising those principles. But I don't think we can answer that specific question today.
No, Councillor Rice, what I was going to say is that this is an exploratory motion to develop some options for council to consider. So it would give you more information so you could understand all of these questions that you're asking in terms of what the trade-offs are associated with a number of the items you've identified here today.
Okay, thank you. And even I really appreciate this motion and I want to get more information back to us. And even though I really have concern and for the tax increase, I heard the solution and for the phase on one for 3 years. And yes, and for looking for more information and then how we can do this. And but the basic, the bottom line, the principle, we don't want to increase additional pressure, tax pressure, and for our residents, and it's specific due to the past 2 years COVID-19 and the economic downtime. And then I think we need to give the consideration and for our Edmontonians. And yes, I'm looking forward and for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Knack to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to say thanks for the motion. I'll actually say that, I'm glad we're exploring options, but I'm well past the point of needing to explore options at this. Why I want to stress that is that, and this is a point you made earlier, Mr. Mayor, I think about the mobile home communities in the city of Edmonton, which for those of you unaware, because there's only a few set up in the city, mobile home communities are taxed using two different mechanisms. One of which is that the homeowner, the mobile homeowner, is charged under the residential tax rate, and then the property owner is charged under the other residential tax rate. And these are communities where we have oftentimes maybe a greater number of people who might be in different income levels and have been constantly the recipient of this penalization of density. And so I appreciate why this was done years ago, but I actually think if we're talking about a fair and equitable approach, and I hope that as part of this report, we would clearly in a GBA plus analysis, outline the impact to mobile home communities in particular. That is the reason why I think it is long overdue for us to get rid of this over other residential category. This has disproportionately impacted mobile home communities. I happen to represent one of them, and I think it is time we get rid of that. So beyond any of the other benefits, which I think there are some of removing the other residential category, likely in a gradual way, likely over 2 or 3 or 4 years to make that a very minimal increase to other property owners, so that these property owners who I think have been long overdue for a decrease can start to experience that decrease. So I think from an equitable standpoint, we need to make this change. And again, I think it benefits renters, I think it benefits others, but it's the mobile home communities that has been sitting in the back of my mind from the very beginning. So that's why, I'll support this, but the spoiler alert, I'll be supporting transitioning the other residential subclass out and putting it all into a subclass because I think mobile home communities deserve this at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Stevenson, I'll go to you to close the item.
Thank you. Really just to echo my comments in introducing this, that I do think phasing out the other residential is an excellent opportunity for greater equity in our community. And, to Councillor Knack's point, there are many different groups that I think will benefit from this. I'm also very excited to explore tax subclassing as a way to implement city plan. Again, I think our taxation system can be a really critical lever in how we help achieve our future vision. So this is work I'm incredibly excited for. Really appreciate administration taking this on and very much looking forward to the conversations ahead. If as hoped, this motion passes. So thank you. And with that, I'll close.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I'll call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. All right, so we have 2 more items left. And our next item,
Mayor,
sorry.
point of order.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a point of order. I'm still learning, but I selected 9.1 thinking it had to be selected but I see that it didn't, so I actually have no questions for 9.1. I don't know if other counselors did, but I wonder if we could address that one quickly.
Oh, okay. All right, so we can, so you don't have, we need to bring it forward. We don't have to bring it forward. That's the next item
Yeah,
we
we've
have.
already made it, so just watching the clock and trying to finesse in the off chance that you could be done by 12 o'clock. If we bring forward 9.1 and you just accept it, I'm just messaging with Councillor Cartmell's office to see if we could get him.
Yeah, he would, but all he needs about 10 minutes to get here.
Sorry?
He would need about 10 minutes to get
Or
here.
he could join virtually. So I'm just trying to get a sense if there's just one councillor that has questions on this matter.
Yeah. There's no questions on this matter. This was selected under the premise that this must be selected.
Sorry, I'm talking about 6.1, because once we deal with 9.1, then we only have one more item. And
Oh,
there's an
the
absolute
6.1. I don't have any question on 6.1.
Okay, that's great. We will see if we can reach Councillor Cartmell, and if you want to bring 9.1 forward and deal with it, that'd be super.
Got it, okay.
So I move to bring 9.1 forward.
9.1 forward, please.
You don't need to bring
We
it
don't have to,
forward
that's
because
the
it is
next
the
item
next item.
anyways.
Sorry.
Yeah, it doesn't have to.
I was tricking you.
Doesn't have to be brought forward. That's the next item. Okay, if we go slowly, give Councillor Cartmell maybe 5 minutes to get here or get on the phone. All right, so no question. We don't have this private. Do we have to go into private or we
No,
just?
no, you don't, if you just want to.
Move the
Yeah,
recommendation.
I'm happy to move the recommendation that the proposed settlement authority as outlined in the March 9th, 2022 Office of the City Manager Report OCM 01061 be approved, and that the March 9th, 2022 Office of the City Manager Report OCM 01061 remain private pursuant to sections 24, advice from officials, 27, privileged information of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions on the motion on the floor? 1, 2, 3. Seeing none, I will call the vote.
We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the votes, please. Vote is carried. Want to take a 5-minute?
If it's okay, if you want to maybe pass a motion to bring 6.1 forward.
Yes.
We're all trying to reach Councillor Cartmell, and then if.
Councillor Knack, would you please?
Happy to move to bring that forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on bringing 6.1 forward? I see none. I'll call the vote.
Point of order, and then because I couldn't correct the request, I do have a question for bring 6.1. 6.1 I selected and specific for the 1:30 time specific because I'm afraid Councillor Cartmell cannot join us for
Yeah,
this.
so we are checking with him, Councillor
Councillor
Rice.
Cartmell is but a moment away from joining us.
Yeah, he'll be joining us, so we're waiting for him to join before we proceed with this item. So he just joined us now, so.
Okay, so we only have like the 10 minutes to 12 o'clock. We will have recess, right?
Yeah, I think we'll be able to finish it in 10 minutes. I don't see any other council members have questions. Only you have questions on this, Councillor Rice, so.
Yes, I do have a few questions to.
So let's vote on to bring it forward first. Let's vote on to bring it forward first.
So we're just waiting for Councillor Rice's vote and yourself, Mr. Mayor, and then we can.
So if you could vote on this, Councillor Rice, to bring it forward, so we can talk about it now.
Okay, so Cartmell is
He is here.
he's here. Okay, thank you.
We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay, so Councillor Rice, you selected this item, and I'll go to you for questions to administration.
Okay, sure. And I understand this project and then is infrastructure improvement for community. Actually, and really supports infrastructure improvements for the community, and specifically this project is a stage 2. So from public perspective, I do have a few questions. Understand and COVID has limited all of our ability to communicate with our constituents. And so my first question is about, with this limitation of public engagement caused by COVID, does administration believe it received enough public input into the bridge location?
Hi, Councillor Rice. Yes, despite COVID, we've had ample public engagement on this project and enough to inform the decisions that have been made related to the recommended entire scope of stage 2, with a point of clarification that the 142 Street pedestrian bridge is actually not part of the study area because it's outside of the River Valley bylaw.
Okay. So for this stage 2, for all the funding is already includes approved budget, or will be added to 2023 to 26 budget?
All budget's been approved.
So all budget is approved and already in the past budget cycle. What is the total cost for this stage 2?
Pascal?
Thank you. I'll just look to Chris to confirm. Christopher, if you can respond. Or Natalie.
Sorry, I came in a little bit, just came in. I just, the question is the total budget for stage 2. It's about $110 million. It's still being refined as we go through detailed design right now.
What is the portion of the budget in 2023 to 2026 budget cycle?
The 23 to 26 budget cycle will be the majority of stage 2, as we anticipate the majority of the construction to take place in that budget cycle.
Okay, so this the project schedule and completion date for the construction will be, when will be the construction's finish completion date?
Council Rice, this is Jason with Infrastructure Delivery. The construction is expected to start later this fall if everything goes well. And our intent would be to have stage 2 complete by the end of 2025.
And the 2025, okay. Okay, thank you. Another question I do have is about the neighborhoods has been going through construction related distribution and for a long time. So have anticipated construction distribution being communicated to the neighborhoods?
It's an ongoing communication that happens with residents related to all phases of the Terwilliger construction project, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and it will continue. There's been considerable efforts to try and engage or to share the information with the public in advance of any construction activities.
Okay. Have the last question is about have pedestrian and cyclist usage is estimated being completed. So for the usage.
For what areas specifically are you referring to, Councillor Rice? What area are you referring to specifically, Councillor Rice?
Oh.
Councillor Rice may be frozen.
Yeah, I think she has, so, yeah. Okay, maybe you can get that offline. So I'll go to Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Stevenson? Quick.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I am a bit confused about the project being fully funded. It does say in the report that the renewal and widening of Rainbow Valley bridges is currently unfunded. Yeah, just some clarity there.
Okay. The project is fully funded from a growth perspective. So we have both the funding from the City of Edmonton and the province that has been recognized. The portion that we are anticipating to add is the renewal funding that is part of our regular renewal program associated with the bridge replacement. And since that work is going to take place in the 23-26, we're going to recognize it at that point as part of our renewal program investment.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, you know, I always have a bit of concern with widening roads, particularly as I understand that the 4 lanes in each direction wouldn't include a dedicated transit lane. So just wondering how this project is sitting within that overall budget prioritization process that's happening.
So Councillor Stevenson, if I could caution, this is about environmental impact, right? So not budget questions,
no,
right?
very fair, very fair. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, for that. So then just on that, was the River Valley Alliance consulted as part of this, and were they provided with a copy of the report in advance of it being posted for this meeting?
We wouldn't provide.
I'll just look to confirm with Natalie if the River Valley Alliance was specifically engaged with.
In this case, I may have to defer to Christopher. I don't believe that the River Valley Alliance themselves have been engaged with. We've been engaging with a number of different stakeholders in this area. But Chris, can you jump in on some of the specifics as to whether the RVA was involved?
Thanks. No, the RVA wasn't specifically addressed as one of the stakeholders, but we have been very, very routinely involved with a lot of the nearby stakeholders, including Snow Valley, and community leagues and other residents in the project study area.
Okay, and is that, do you know if that's, has there ever been a conversation with the River Valley Alliance in terms of their level of interest in these types of projects and studies that are happening?
Adam, do you want to go?
Well, I was just going to say, Councillor Stevenson, when we approach capital projects, we do a broad engagement. We do our best to include all in terms of a specific outreach. It will depend on the project type, but certainly we consider all stakeholders and we provide ample opportunity for folks to weigh in. In terms of do you share this information with them in advance? This is a report asking approval of council, so we typically don't share the specifics. It's part of council approving based on the River Valley bylaw component.
Okay, well, maybe that's just a conversation for the future. I just, you know, it was a very significant and lengthy document. So again, just recognizing the amount of time that groups may need to review that thoroughly. But certainly something we can follow up. I wonder, moving forward, if there has been in the past, or if there's any consideration moving forward that sort of those groups that have a specific interest in the River Valley would sort of be routinely consulted when the River Valley bylaw is activated for environmental impact assessments like this.
If I can jump in, I'd like to also add that we do routinely engage with a number of different environmental groups, including the River Valley Conservation Coalition. The River Valley Alliance, we do work with them quite closely on other projects that are part of their strategic plan. And one of the big things that they are focused on is improving connectivity in and around the River Valley and across Edmonton and our partner jurisdictions. And so we are working quite closely with them and other environmental groups for projects that do touch on the River Valley.
Okay, and that's wonderful. Wonderful to hear that you've been working with the coalition as well. So excellent. I think you know they offer some really important perspectives. I think that can help enhance the work that's happening. So appreciate that those conversations are ongoing. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Knack, would you move the recommendation? Yeah, thank you so much.
That's it. I have no questions. Thank you.
Good. All right. So recommendation is moved. I see. Councillor Knack, you to speak to this or just one?
No, I have nothing to speak to. Thank you.
Councillor Cartmel, you have any, want to briefly speak to this or we can vote on it?
I have no comments. I'm in a bad place to say anything.
All right. I'll call the vote.
Councillor Rice? I think you're muted, Councillor Rice.
So I'm still not getting into the screen yet.
That's okay. That's okay. Would you like to vote in favor or against?
Yes, it's in favor.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. All right, so any notes of motions or motions without customary notice? I don't have any notices given to me. Were there any? Nope. I'll just look at the board. So if somebody's stepping in, I see no one. So that means no notes of motions. And we are adjourned right at 12.
My optimism
Yes,
is rewarded.
Councilor Mayor.